The night the bet was made, the wind came down from the hills like it had a grudge to settle. Dust slid across the street of the small frontier town, tapping against saloon doors and hitching posts. Folks inside the Lantern Saloon leaned close to their glasses, talking low, because something about the air made men careful with their words. That was when the rich rancher laughed too loud and said something he could not take back. He was known across the county for his land, his cattle, and his pride, and pride has a way of leading a man straight into trouble. The rancher had earned his wealth the hard way, or so he liked to tell it. Long days in the saddle, nights sleeping under open skies, and years of buying up land from men who had run out of luck. His ranch spread wider than the river bend, fenced with new wire and guarded by hired hands who did what they were told. In town, people tipped their hats to him, but they also watched him close. Wealth in the Wild West carried respect, but it also drew quiet resentment. That night, with cards on the table and whiskey in his blood, the rancher forgot all of that. The bet started as a joke, the kind that passes between men who think nothing can touch them. A few hands at the table grinned, others shook their heads. The subject of the wager was the widow who lived at the edge of town, in a small house that leaned toward the cottonwoods. She had come west with her husband years before, chasing a promise that died with him on a stretch of bad road. Since then, she kept to herself, dressed in black long after folks thought it proper, and spoke only when spoken to. Some said grief had hardened her. Others whispered that she knew things she should not. The rancher had crossed paths with her before. He had seen her at the general store, counting coins slow and careful. He had seen her at church, eyes forward, hands folded tight. There was something about her calm that unsettled him, like she carried a weight no one else could see. When her name came up at the table, he smiled the kind of smile men use when they believe the world bends to their will. He said no woman in that town could refuse him. The room went quiet then, because even in a place built on rough talk, some lines were best left alone. By sunrise, the bet had taken shape, sealed with laughter and a slap on the table. The rancher rode out that morning with the sun at his back, confident and careless. He told himself it was just a game, a way to prove he still held power over more than land and cattle. Yet, as his horse carried him toward the edge of town, doubt crept in like a shadow. The widow's house stood apart from the others, surrounded by bare earth and a single broken fence. It looked less like a home and more like a place waiting to be left behind. When she opened the door, she did not seem surprised to see him. Her face was pale but steady, her eyes clear and watchful. She invited him in without a word, and that alone made his confidence falter. Inside, the house smelled of clean wood and old memories. A man's coat hung on a peg by the door, worn thin at the elbows. The rancher felt like an intruder, though he had walked into plenty of homes uninvited before. He reminded himself of the bet, of the men waiting to hear how it ended, and pushed the feeling aside. What passed between them that day was spoken of later in hushed tones and half-truths. There were no raised voices, no broken furniture, no spectacle to feed gossip. It was quiet, almost too quiet, as if both understood this meeting carried more weight than either had planned. The rancher left before dusk, his hat low over his eyes, telling himself the matter was finished. He had won, just as he always did. Or so he believed as he rode back toward his wide ranch and the life he thought he controlled. That night, sleep came hard. The widow's calm followed him, her steady gaze pressing into his thoughts. He tried to laugh it off, blaming the whiskey and the long day. But something had shifted like the ground before a storm. Days passed, and the town buzzed with rumor. Some said the bet was true. Others said the rancher had finally met a woman who did not bow to him. The widow said nothing. She went on with her life, buying flour, tending her small garden, walking past men who watched her with new interest and old fear. A week later, a note arrived at the ranch, folded neat and sealed with plain wax. No name marked the outside. The rancher read it once, then again, his jaw tightening with each line. The widow asked him to meet her after sundown, back at her house. There was something she needed to tell him, something he had a right to know. He told himself he could ignore it, tear it up, and let the past stay buried. Instead, he saddled his horse as the sky turned red and rode out alone. The house looked the same as before, quiet and still. Inside, the widow waited by the table, a lamp casting long shadows on the walls. She did not offer him a seat. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now, sharp as a blade hidden in cloth. She spoke of her husband, of the night he died, of a deal made long ago on land that now belonged to the rancher. With each word, the room seemed to close in, the air growing heavy. The rancher felt a chill run through him, a feeling he had not known since his poorest days. Then she said the thing that made him freeze. It was not an accusation shouted in anger, but a quiet truth laid bare. She revealed what she knew, how she knew it, and why the bet had never been a game to her. The lamp flickered as if the house itself held its breath. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the door. The rancher stood there, hands clenched, realizing that the land he prized, the power he wielded, and the life he built might rest on a secret that could tear it all apart. And as the widow watched him with those steady eyes, it became clear that this story was only beginning. The rancher did not sit down. He stood there with his hat still on, feeling like the floor might give way if he shifted his weight. The widow's words hung between them, heavy and sharp, and though she had stopped speaking, he could still hear her voice in his head. Outside, the cottonwoods whispered, and the sound reminded him of cattle moving at night, restless and uneasy. He had faced angry men, bad seasons, and gunfire without blinking, yet this quiet room had him locked in place. She finally turned away from him and reached into a small wooden box on the table. Her hands did not shake as she lifted out a folded paper, worn soft from age. She did not hand it to him right away. Instead, she held it like something fragile, something earned through pain. She told him this paper was the reason she had stayed in that town when she could have left. It was the reason she watched him grow rich while she scraped by. The rancher felt sweat gather at the back of his neck as he stared at the paper, already guessing what it might be. Years before, when the land was still wild and cheap, deals were made with little more than a handshake and a promise. Men trusted each other because they had to, because courts were far away and survival depended on cooperation. The widow spoke of one such deal, made between her husband and a man who had since ridden off under a different name. That deal involved the very stretch of land where the rancher's best cattle now grazed. The river bend, the rich grass, the place he had always believed was his strongest claim. The rancher remembered that land well. He had bought it during a hard winter when a tired man needed money more than hope. The seller had been nervous, eager to close the deal, eyes darting like someone looking over his shoulder. At the time, the rancher thought nothing of it. Opportunity did not come with explanations in the Wild West. Now, standing in the widow's house, the memory returned with new weight. He wondered whose shadow that man had been running from. The widow told him her husband had believed in fairness, even out there where fairness often died young. He had kept records, written things down when others trusted memory. When he was killed, those papers nearly vanished with him. She had saved what she could, hiding them when men came asking questions, burning what might get her killed. The rancher listened, his jaw tight, because each detail felt like a rope slowly drawing tight around his chest. He wanted to interrupt, to deny it all, but something in her calm stopped him. This was not a woman seeking revenge through noise or tears. This was a woman who had waited, watched, and chosen her moment. She said she never planned to speak to him, never planned to let him into her house again. But the bet had changed things. It had shown her how lightly he treated what mattered to others. That was when she decided he deserved to know the truth, even if it ruined him. When she finally handed him the paper, he did not take it at first. He stared at it like it might bite him. The lamp cast a yellow glow over the table, and for a moment the rancher saw his own reflection in the glass, older than he remembered. When he did take the paper, his fingers brushed hers, and he felt a strange jolt, not of desire, but of recognition. They were both survivors of a world that took more than it gave. The paper spoke of boundaries, of shared rights to water, of an agreement that never made it into any official ledger. It was not enough to drag him into court, not yet. But it was enough to raise questions, enough to make powerful men uneasy. The widow watched his face as he read, her eyes searching for something. Guilt, perhaps, fear, more likely. He folded the paper slowly and handed it back without a word. He asked her what she wanted. The question came out rough, stripped of the smooth confidence he usually wore. She said she wanted what had been promised, nothing more. She wanted her husband's name cleared, his work honored. She wanted the land to tell the truth, even if the town never did. The rancher almost laughed then, not from humor but from disbelief. In his world, land told no stories unless men forced it to. He left the house soon after, stepping into the cool night like a man walking out of a bad dream. The stars above were sharp and bright, offering no comfort. As he rode back toward his ranch, his thoughts raced ahead of his horse. If word of this paper spread, men would come asking questions. Some would want answers, others would want silence. The rancher knew too well how both kinds of men handled problems. At the ranch, he called for his foreman before dawn. He asked questions that seemed harmless on the surface, about old purchases, about the winter years back, about men who had passed through and never returned. The foreman answered carefully, sensing the shift in his employer's mood. There were things a man remembered and things he chose to forget. The rancher could see that now, clearer than ever. Days passed, and the town grew tense without knowing why. The widow walked the streets as she always had, but people noticed how often the rancher's men rode past her house. Some said he was watching her, others said he was protecting her. Neither was true. He was watching the ground beneath his feet, unsure which step might cause it to break. At night, the rancher dreamed of fences falling and cattle scattering into the dark. He dreamed of water changing course, of maps bleeding ink until no lines remained. He woke with his heart pounding, his mouth dry, and the widow's steady voice echoing in his mind. He realized then that wealth could not buy sleep, not when truth waited in the shadows. The widow, meanwhile, prepared quietly. She sorted through what little she owned, setting aside what mattered. She knew men like the rancher did not lose gracefully. She also knew secrets had a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply buried. Each morning, she looked toward the hills and wondered how long the calm would last. Neither of them spoke again, but both felt the pull of what was coming. The land lay between them, silent and patient, holding answers it had kept for years. Somewhere in that silence, a reckoning was taking shape, and when it came, it would not spare anyone who stood in its path. The days that followed felt stretched thin, like leather pulled too far over a frame. The rancher went about his business as usual, riding fence lines, checking stock, giving orders with the same steady voice. To anyone watching, he looked unchanged, yet inside, every decision felt heavier. Each acre of land he crossed reminded him of the paper in the widow's box and the quiet certainty in her eyes. He had always believed ownership came from strength and timing. Now he wondered how much of it rested on borrowed ground. Word began to drift through town, not as clear talk, but as a feeling. The saloon grew louder at night, men drinking more than usual, voices rising and falling like waves. Old stories surfaced, the kind people tell when they sense change coming. Stories about deals gone wrong, about men who vanished into the plains and left questions behind. The rancher heard these stories and said nothing, but his silence was noticed. In a place where power liked to announce itself, quiet could be more troubling than anger. One afternoon, a stranger rode in from the south, his horse lathered and his eyes sharp. He did not go to the saloon right away. He went to the land office, then to the general store, asking careful questions. By evening, everyone knew someone was digging where dirt had long been left alone. The rancher saw the stranger from across the street and felt a cold settle in his chest. He did not need to hear the questions to know where they might lead. The widow saw the stranger too. She watched from her window as he spoke with townsfolk, his posture polite but persistent. She knew men like him. They followed trails others ignored, and they rarely traveled without reason. She told herself she had prepared for this, that once the truth started moving, it could not be stopped. Still, when night fell, she locked her door and kept the lamp low, listening to every sound outside. At the ranch, the foreman pulled the rancher aside and spoke in a low voice. He said men were talking, that someone had mentioned old boundary lines near the river bend. He asked if there was anything he should know before trouble found them. The rancher looked out over his cattle, their dark shapes spread across the land like shadows. He said only that times were changing and that loyalty would matter more than ever. The foreman nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. The land itself seemed restless. The river ran high that season, eating away at its banks, blurring lines that had once been clear. Fence posts leaned where the soil gave way, wire sagging under its own weight. The rancher rode out to inspect the damage and found himself standing at the edge of the bend mentioned in the widow's paper. The grass there was thick and green, the kind that made cattle grow strong. He had always loved that place. Now it felt like it was watching him. Memories surfaced uninvited. He remembered his early days when hunger had driven him harder than ambition. He remembered the man who sold him that land, the quick deal, the way he avoided eye contact. At the time, the rancher had told himself it was none of his concern. A man did what he had to do to survive. But survival had turned into comfort and comfort into power. He wondered how many choices he had made without looking back. The widow spent her days much the same, but her nights were filled with thought. She went through her husband's remaining papers again, checking dates, names, small details that might matter if questions came. She did not plan to hand them over easily. Trust had cost her too much already. Yet she also knew she could not carry this alone forever. The truth, once stirred, demanded witnesses. The stranger finally approached the rancher. It happened in daylight on the main street where walking away would look like guilt. He introduced himself as a man interested in land records and old claims. His voice was calm, his smile practiced. He said there were rumors of unresolved agreements tied to the river bend. The rancher listened, his face unreadable, and said rumors were common in a place built on dust and dreams. The stranger nodded as if he had expected that answer. After that meeting, the rancher felt eyes on him everywhere. In the saloon, conversations paused when he entered. At church, hymns felt shorter, prayers quieter. He began to realize that power did not disappear all at once. It eroded like riverbanks under steady water. Each look, each whisper carried a small cut. The widow crossed paths with the stranger near the general store. He tipped his hat and asked if she had lived in the area long. She said long enough. He asked about her husband, careful not to sound curious. She answered with the truth, brief and plain. As he walked away, she sensed he already knew more than he let on. That knowledge both comforted and frightened her. Meanwhile, men with interests tied to the rancher began to stir. A neighboring landholder sent word asking about the rumors. A buyer delayed a cattle deal without explanation. Money, once eager to flow toward the rancher, hesitated. He responded by tightening his grip, calling in favors, reminding people of past help given. Yet even as he did, he felt the strain. Fear made allies unreliable. One evening, a storm rolled in fast, dark clouds swallowing the sky. The widow stood on her porch as the first drops fell, watching lightning split the horizon. She thought of her husband riding in a storm much like this one, full of plans that never saw morning. Inside, she felt the familiar ache of loss mixed now with resolve. Whatever came next, she would not turn away again. The rancher rode out in that storm, checking fences by lantern light. Thunder boomed and rain soaked him through, but he welcomed the punishment. It felt like something he deserved, though he could not say why. As he worked, he imagined the land without his name on it, imagined men measuring and dividing what he had claimed as his own. The thought made his chest tighten, not just from fear of loss, but from the realization that he had built his life on ground that might never have been fully his. By the time the storm passed, both the rancher and the widow knew the calm was over. The stranger remained in town, asking more questions, drawing quiet maps. The river continued to rise, reshaping the land inch by inch. And between past promises and present power, a line was forming that neither side could step away from. The truth waited, patient as the earth itself, ready to demand its due. The town woke one morning to the sound of wagons moving before sunrise. It was not the usual trade or travel. Men were arriving from nearby settlements, some with papers tucked into their coats, others with nothing but questions. The stranger from the south had sent word out, and now the quiet place felt like a pot set too close to the fire. The rancher watched from his porch as dust rose on the road. Each wagon another reminder that matters once buried were clawing their way back into daylight. He called a meeting with his closest hands, men who had ridden with him through drought and hard winters. They stood in the barn, hats in hand, listening as he spoke of rumors and records, of outsiders stirring trouble. He did not lie, but he did not tell the whole truth either. He spoke of protecting what they had built together, of keeping order while others chased shadows. The men nodded, though a few exchanged looks. Loyalty was strong, but uncertainty had a way of cracking even the toughest bonds. The widow felt the shift too. Her simple routine was broken by neighbors stopping to talk longer than usual, by cautious kindness layered over curiosity. Some asked about her husband, others about the land. She answered carefully, choosing words like stones placed across a river. At night, she sat by the window and watched lanterns move through town, knowing decisions were being made without her voice in the room. Still, she trusted the truth to hold its own, even if it took time. The stranger finally requested a formal gathering. He wanted records laid out, claims examined, voices heard. The idea unsettled many, but once spoken aloud, it could not be taken back. The rancher agreed in public, though his chest tightened as he did. Refusing would only deepen suspicion. Agreeing meant opening doors he had kept closed for years. He told himself he could manage whatever came. He always had. In the days leading up to the gathering, tensions rose like heat before a storm. The saloon filled with debate, some men defending the rancher, others questioning old deals they had never fully trusted. The river bend became a frequent topic, its fertile grass now a symbol of everything at stake. Even those with no claim felt invested, because land disputes in the Wild West had a way of touching everyone sooner or later. The widow received a visit she did not expect. The foreman came to her door one afternoon, hat pressed to his chest. He spoke plainly, saying the rancher was not the only one affected by this. Many livelihoods depended on how things turned out. He did not threaten, but his words carried weight. She listened, then told him she understood more than he knew. She said fairness did not come easy, but it was still worth seeking. The foreman left with more questions than answers. That evening the rancher rode alone to the river bend. The sun dipped low, casting gold across the water, and for a moment the land looked peaceful, untouched by human struggle. He dismounted and stood there, boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. He thought of the widow's husband, of a promise made and forgotten, of his own rise from nothing. He wondered if holding on too tightly had blinded him to what mattered. Across town, the widow prepared her papers one last time. She wrapped them carefully, as if they were fragile, though they were only ink and hope. She did not know how the gathering would end, but she knew she would speak when the time came. Her fear was real, but it no longer ruled her. Years of loss had taught her that silence carried its own kind of pain. The day of the gathering arrived under a wide, cloudless sky. People filled the town hall, standing shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with expectation. The stranger laid out maps and records on a long table, his movements steady. He spoke of history, of claims left unresolved, of the importance of facing truth even when it unsettled the present. The rancher listened from the front row, his face calm, his hands clenched just out of sight. When the widow entered, a hush fell over the room. She took a seat near the back, her posture straight, her gaze steady. The rancher felt her presence like a weight on his back. He did not turn to look at her. He focused instead on the stranger's voice, on the papers being passed around, on the growing sense that this moment had been years in the making. Questions came from all sides. Some were sharp, others cautious. The rancher answered when addressed, choosing his words with care. He did not deny the deal outright, but he questioned its standing, its timing, its proof. The widow listened, her grip tightening on her bundle. She waited for the right opening, knowing one wrong step could turn the room against her. As the discussion grew heated, the riverbend map was spread wide for all to see. Lines drawn long ago cut across the land, faint but clear enough to stir debate. Voices rose. Accusations hung heavy in the air. The rancher stood then, asking for order, reminding everyone of the work he had put into making that land productive. His words carried force, but they no longer held the room the way they once did. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. It felt as if the town itself leaned closer, listening. The widow rose slowly, her movement deliberate. The room quieted again. She had not spoken yet, but everyone knew she would. The rancher finally turned to face her, their eyes meeting across the crowded space. In that moment, something shifted between them, not anger or fear, but recognition. She stepped forward, papers in hand, ready to speak the truth she had carried alone for so long. The stranger watched closely. The townsfolk held their breath. The rancher felt his heart pound, knowing that whatever came next would change everything, not just for him, but for the land and the people tied to it. A moment hung there, fragile and charged, as the past and future pressed together, waiting for one voice to break the silence. The widow's voice carried through the hall, calm and steady, cutting through the tension like a clean blade. She did not accuse or raise her tone. She spoke as someone telling a long-held truth, one she had learned to live with. She told them about her husband, about his belief that even in the Wild West, a man's word still mattered. She explained the agreement made by the river bend, how it was meant to protect both families, not enrich one at the cost of the other. As she spoke, faces in the room softened, memories stirred, and the land on the map seemed to take on a voice of its own. She laid the papers on the table, smoothing them with care. The stranger leaned in, examining dates, markings, and signatures. A murmur ran through the crowd as people recognized names tied to early days of the town. These were not strangers or ghosts. They were fathers, uncles, men whose hands had helped raise barns and dig wells. The past no longer felt distant. It stood right there among them. The rancher listened, his chest tight, his thoughts racing. When she finished, he stood slowly. For a moment no one spoke. He looked at the papers, then at the map, then finally at the widow. He said he would not pretend the land meant little to him. It had been the backbone of his success, the proof of years of hard work. But he also said he could not deny what stood before him. The agreement had existed, whether it had suited him or not. He spoke of his own beginnings, of hunger and fear, of grabbing chances without asking too many questions. He admitted that in his rise he had stopped looking back. The room stayed quiet, not out of judgment but attention. He said wealth had taught him many things, but it had also taken something from him. Standing there now, he realized what that was. The stranger cleared his throat and spoke next. He confirmed the papers were real, their claims valid enough to stand. The River Bend land, he said, could not be held under a single name anymore. It would need to be divided, its history honored. A ripple of reaction moved through the hall, but it was not anger. It was relief, like a storm finally breaking. The rancher nodded slowly. He said he would honor the agreement fully, not just in boundary lines, but in spirit. He offered the widow more than land. He offered partnership. He said her husband's work deserved to be recognized, and her future deserved security. The words surprised even him as they left his mouth, but once spoken, they felt right. The widow studied him for a long moment. The hall seemed to hold its breath again, then she nodded. She said she did not seek to take what another had built, only to reclaim what had been promised. She agreed to the terms on the condition that her husband's name be tied to the land, not hidden in old papers. The rancher agreed without hesitation. The gathering ended without cheers or anger, just quiet conversations and thoughtful faces. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting warm light over the town. People lingered in small groups, talking about the past and what the future might look like now. The stranger packed his records, his work done, and rode out before dark, leaving behind a place changed by truth. In the weeks that followed, fences were moved and new markers set. The river bend became shared ground, its rich grass feeding cattle from both sides. The widow took an active role, learning the business of ranching, her presence steady and respected. The rancher found himself listening more, speaking less, and sleeping better than he had in years. The town adjusted, old grudges faded. New trust took root, the saloon talk shifted from rumors to plans. Trade improved and cooperation replaced quiet fear. People saw that fairness did not weaken strength. It gave it direction. One evening, the rancher rode out to the river bend again. This time, the widow stood there too, watching the water move slow and sure. They spoke easily now, not as rivals, but as partners bound by shared ground and hard lessons. The land stretched before them, wide and honest, carrying the weight of its history without bitterness. The rancher realized then that the bet that started it all had not taken from him. It had given him something he did not know he needed, a chance to face the truth, a chance to make things right. In the fading light, with the river steady at their feet, both knew the future would not be without challenges. But it would be built on solid ground, and that made all the difference.